They ignored his stable beam lean shot until it cracked a ridge nest. 0521 hours. July 18, 1943. Hill country 6 miles inland from Gela, Sicily. Sergeant Raymond Moss crouched in the skeleton of a burned barn, his rifle positioned against a charred beam in a manner that would have earned him disciplinary action at any marksmanship school in the United States Army. The Springfield M1903A4 rested at a 12-degree diagonal cant, stock wedged against weathered oak, barrel supported not by sandbags or bipod but by the angled wood itself, a violation of every fundamental principle taught at Fort Benning. The beam lean. The technique officers called unstable, unreliable, unmilitary. The technique that might be the only way to kill a man 600 yards uphill. 600 yards. Uphill. Through wind that shifted every 30 seconds in these Sicilian ridges. Against a target that exposed itself for less than 2 seconds during machine gun belt changes. Impossible by conventional doctrine. Moss had watched 3 trained snipers attempt the shot across the previous 72 hours. All 3 had failed. Corporal Hayes, Camp Perry competitor, qualified expert marksman, had fired 8 rounds without effect. Staff Sergeant Kowalski, veteran of North Africa, 11 confirmed kills, had fired 12 rounds and achieved 1 near miss that sparked concrete beside the German position. Private First Class Chin, Chinese-American from San Francisco with eyes like a hawk and hands steady as bedrock, had fired 17 rounds and quit in frustration. "Can't be done, Sarge," Chin had said yesterday evening, voice hollow with defeat. "The angle's wrong. Uphill shooting at this distance, the trajectory calculation's impossible. You're fighting gravity the whole flight path. Bullet drops different than level ground. And the German only shows for 2 seconds, barely enough time to acquire target, let alone compensate for wind and angle. But the German machine gun position had to be neutralized. Because the MG-42 nest, dug into the ridge 600 yards northeast, commanded perfect enfilade fire on the only road suitable for Allied armor advancing toward Enna. 3 days ago, American tank column had attempted the route. The German gunner, positioned in a concrete emplacement with a firing port exactly 8 inches high and 14 inches wide, had opened fire at 1,200 yards and disabled 2 Sherman tanks with sustained fire into track assemblies and vision ports. Infantry couldn't advance. The road lay completely exposed for 800 yards. No cover, no concealment, perfect killing ground for an MG-42 firing 1,200 rounds per minute with effective range of 2,000 yards. Artillery had tried 8 fire missions across 3 days. The German position was dug too deep, concrete too thick, angle too steep for anything except direct hit by heavy ordnance. None achieved. Air support had tried. P-40 Warhawks made 3 strafing runs. The machine gun nest sat in a narrow ravine with rock walls on 3 sides. Pilots couldn't get angle for effective rocket attack without flying into the cliff sides. Which left snipers. Which led to 3 failures and mounting pressure from battalion command to neutralize the position or find alternative route, neither of which seemed possible. Moss had studied the German position for 16 hours yesterday, watching through field glasses from 4 different observation points, mapping the gunner's patterns. The German was professional, knew his craft, understood fields of fire and target priority. He exposed himself exactly twice per hour. Once during ammunition belt change, once during what appeared to be scheduled observation sweep. 2 seconds each time. Never the same minute. Never predictable. A 2-second window to acquire target, compensate for distance and wind and uphill trajectory deviation, and place a shot through an 8x14-inch opening at 600 yards. Hayes had tried prone position, standard sniper methodology. Solid, stable, maximum accuracy under normal conditions. But the uphill angle meant extreme neck strain to achieve sight picture, and the tension translated through shoulder and arm into rifle tremor. Microscopic shaking, but enough to throw shots 18 inches off target at 600 yards. Kowalski had tried sitting position with rifle braced on knee, better angle, less neck strain. But the position lacked the bone support of prone, introduced different tremor sources through hip and lower back. His near miss had been closest attempt, but 18 inches at 600 yards still meant complete failure. Chin had tried standing position using a tripod rest. Most stable of the 3 attempts, but standing increased exposure to wind and created respiratory tremor, chest expansion during breathing transmitted through arms into rifle. His 17 shots had formed a pattern roughly 36 inches in diameter around the target area. Precision by infantry standards. Nowhere near sufficient for this task. The problem was consistent. Conventional positions introduced tremor that human muscle control couldn't eliminate at this distance and angle. Moss had thought about the problem through the night, lying in his foxhole, mind working through the physics. He understood shooting the way some men understood engines or mathematics, not through formal education but through lived experience. He'd learned to shoot at age 8 in Kentucky hill country, killing squirrels for food during Depression years when his family ate what they hunted or went hungry. He'd learned that rifles weren't just tools but systems, wood and metal and harmonics and vibration patterns that could be manipulated if you understood how forces transferred through materials. At 0400 hours before dawn, he'd returned to the burned barn. Studied the remaining support beams, fire damaged but structurally intact, aged oak with tight grain, angled where the roof collapse had left them leaning at various degrees. He'd selected one beam, 12-degree cant from vertical, wood grain running diagonally, surface weathered smooth by years of Sicilian sun and wind. He'd positioned his rifle against that beam, stock wedged into the angle where would met stone foundation, barrel resting along the diagonal. And he'd felt it immediately. The stability. Not the rigid stability of sandbags or bipod, something different. Organic stability. The wood absorbed microtremors that human muscle couldn't prevent. The grain pattern created natural dampening that concrete or metal couldn't replicate. The angle compensated for uphill trajectory in a way he understood instinctively but couldn't articulate mathematically. Moss had test-fired 3 rounds at dawn, aiming at a distinctive rock formation 580 yards distant at similar uphill angle. All 3 rounds had struck within a 6-inch group, accuracy that should have been impossible without sandbag rest and ideal conditions. The beam wasn't just support. It was a harmonic dampener that absorbed the microtremors conventional shooting positions couldn't eliminate. But try explaining that to Lieutenant Schaefer. At 0445 hours, Schaefer had arrived at the barn position for morning observation, found Moss test firing with rifle canted against charred wood, and immediately objected. "That's not proper shooting form, Sergeant." "No, sir. It's not. Fort Benning teaches 5 acceptable firing positions. None involve leaning rifles against burned lumber at odd angles." "Yes, sir." "So why are you doing it?" Moss had chosen his words carefully. "Because conventional positions aren't working, sir. The uphill angle creates tremor problems that standard methodology can't solve. This beam provides dampening that." "Dampening?" Schaefer's tone had been flat, skeptical. "You're telling me burned wood provides better stability than proper prone position?" "For this specific situation, yes, sir. The grain pattern absorbs microvibration. The cant compensates for uphill trajectory deviation. I've test-fired it. The grouping is consistent." Schaefer had stared at him for a long moment, this 28-year-old sergeant from Kentucky who'd never attended advanced marksmanship school, who'd learned shooting through necessity rather than military training, who was now claiming that unorthodox technique trumped established doctrine. 3 trained snipers have failed this shot, Sergeant Moss. What makes you think amateur improvisation will succeed where professional methodology has not? The question was fair. Moss had no formal qualifications. He'd never attended scout sniper school. His marksmanship record showed expert qualification but nothing exceptional. On paper he was less qualified than Hayes, Kowalski or Chen. Because they were fighting the position, sir. Trying to force their bodies into stability that human muscle can't maintain at this angle and duration. I'm using the environment. Letting the wood do what bone and muscle can't. That's not military doctrine. No, sir. But doctrine isn't working. Schaefer had studied the German position through field glasses. The concrete emplacement barely visible as dark rectangle against hillside rock, the firing port that revealed nothing from this distance. Below that position, the road stretched empty, vital for armor advance, currently unusable. "If you miss," Schaefer had said quietly, "and that German triangulates your muzzle flash, he'll rake this barn with MG42 fire. You'll be dead before you can relocate." "Yes, sir." "And if you hit but don't achieve kill, same result. He'll know exactly where the shot originated." "Yes, sir." "So this is one-shot solution or suicide?" "Yes, sir." Schaefer had nodded slowly. "I can't officially authorize unorthodox methodology that violates training protocols." "Understood." "Understood, sir. But I also can't officially prevent a sergeant from choosing his own firing position during combat operations." Schaefer had met his eyes directly. "Take your shot, Sergeant. Make it count." Then the lieutenant had departed, leaving Moss alone with his rifle and his beam and his theory about wood grain harmonics. That had been 40 minutes ago. Now, at 0521 hours, Moss waited for the 2-second window that would come sometime in the next 38 minutes, the irregular interval when the German gunner would expose himself for ammunition belt change or observation sweep. The rifle felt right against the beam. Stock wedged solid, barrel supported along the diagonal, his cheek weld consistent with the cant. He'd compensated his sight picture for the angle, not through mathematical calculation but through instinctive understanding of trajectory that came from 10,000 shots fired across Kentucky hills during his youth. Wind was the variable. Here in the Sicilian ridges, air currents shifted unpredictably, thermal rising from sun-heated rock, cooling descending from shadowed ravines, lateral flow through the valleys. At 600 yards, wind drift could push a bullet 3 feet off target. Moss watched grass stems on the hillside between his position and the German nest. Watched dust devils form and dissipate. Watched the way morning light revealed air currents through suspended particles. He'd learned wind reading before he understood the physics. Learned that wind wasn't single force but layered currents that affected bullet flight differently at varying distances. Right now, light breeze from left quarter, approximately 8 miles per hour at ground level, shifting to 10 miles per hour at elevation based on grass movement patterns. That meant roughly 14 inches of drift compensation at 600 yards for his .30-06 Springfield load, 168 grain boat tail match ammunition, muzzle velocity 2,650 feet per second. He'd hold 2 feet left of target to compensate. Maybe 2.5 feet given the uphill angle and thinner air at elevation. Maybe. Because ultimately, at 600 yards uphill through shifting wind against a 2-second exposure window, maybe, was the best certainty available. 0534 hours. Moss controlled his breathing. Slow inhalation. Slower exhalation. Heart rate descending. The rifle was part of him now, extension of intention, tool that would translate decision into outcome if his calculation proved correct. He'd killed his first deer at age 9. Had learned that killing required commitment without emotion. No hesitation, no remorse during the act itself. Emotion came after. During the shot, there was only mechanics. Sight picture, breath control, trigger squeeze, follow-through. The German gunner was someone's son. Maybe someone's father. Probably a professional soldier following orders, defending ground he'd been told to hold. In different circumstances they might have shared beer and conversation. But those circumstances didn't exist. The German position killed Americans. That equation was simple. Moss's job was to change that equation. 0537 hours. Through his rifle scope, Weaver 330C 2.5 power magnification, the German firing port appeared as dark rectangle against concrete. 8 inches high. 14 inches wide. The gunner would appear in that rectangle for approximately 2 seconds, visible from chest to head, presenting target roughly 20 inches tall by 18 inches wide. At 600 yards, that target subtended approximately 3.2 minutes of angle. His scope adjustment was 1 MOA per click. He'd need to place the shot within a circle roughly 6 inches in diameter to guarantee hit. Except he wasn't aiming for center mass. He was aiming for the gap. The gap that Chin had noticed yesterday during his final observation before quitting in frustration. The German gunner wore standard Wehrmacht body armor, a shoulder plate that protected upper torso and neck from fragments and glancing rounds. But the plate had a weakness, the articulation gap where metal met collar, roughly 3 inches wide, that allowed head and shoulder movement necessary for weapon operation. If the gunner was facing directly forward, chin up, scanning for targets, that gap was protected by the collar itself. But during belt changes he'd lean forward slightly, head dropping, concentration focused on ammunition feed mechanism. For perhaps 1 full second of his 2-second exposure, that gap would be visible. A 3-inch horizontal opening between shoulder plate and collar, exposing the subclavian artery and upper thoracic region. A 3-inch target. At 600 yards. Uphill. Through shifting wind. Chin had been right to quit. The shot was technically impossible. Except Moss wasn't thinking about possibility. He was thinking about necessity. Because below that German position, the road remained unusable. And every day the road remained closed, American advance toward Enna stalled. And every day the advance stalled, more men died in frontal assaults against prepared positions that could have been flanked if armor could advance. The mathematics of war were brutal and simple. 1 German machine gunner, alive, equaled dozens of American infantry, dead. 1 shot could change that equation. 0541 hours. Moss's world had narrowed to the scope picture. The concrete emplacement. The firing port. The darkness inside that revealed nothing until the moment when it would reveal everything. His breathing had become automatic, slow cycle that didn't require conscious thought. His trigger finger rested lightly on the Springfield's trigger, taking up the first stage slack, feeling the break point where second stage would release the sear and fire the rifle. The beam pressed against his cheek through the rifle stock. He could feel the wood grain, microscopic texture that his skin registered without conscious awareness. Could feel the solidity, the dampening effect that absorbed his heartbeat vibration and respiratory tremor. 3 trained snipers had failed because they'd fought their bodies. Moss was using physics instead. 0544 hours. Movement. The darkness inside the firing port changed. Light shifted subtly as something interrupted the interior shadow. Moss's focus intensified without his eyes actually moving. His finger took up the last millimeter of trigger slack. The German gunner appeared. Head and shoulders visible above the MG-42's receiver assembly, face shadowed by Wehrmacht helmet, body armor visible as lighter gray against dark interior. The gunner's head was down, exactly as Chen had described, attention focused on the belt feed mechanism. And there, the gap. 3 inches of exposed flesh between shoulder plate and collar, visible for perhaps 1 second before the gunner's posture would shift. Moss's sight picture was perfect. Crosshairs aligned 2 feet left of target to compensate for wind drift, elevated slightly for uphill trajectory, centered on the gap that was visible now, right now for 1 second that was already half expired. His trigger finger moved through the break point with pressure so gradual it felt like the trigger fired itself. The Springfield roared. Recoil drove the stock back against his shoulder, the beam absorbing energy that would have translated into barrel rise in conventional position. Through the scope, which he kept aligned through perfect follow-through discipline, he saw the result. The German gunner's head snapped sideways. No dramatic death scene. No theatrical collapse. Just sudden lateral head movement, then the gunner disappearing downward below the firing port edge. 0544 hours and 37 seconds. Impact. Moss worked the Springfield's bolt with mechanical precision. Extract spent casing, chamber fresh round, reacquire sight picture. Standard protocol for follow-up shot if needed. No follow-up shot was needed. The firing port remained empty. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15 seconds. At 20 seconds, movement appeared, different soldier visible for 1 second, leaning toward the fallen gunner. Then that soldier also disappeared. At 40 seconds, white cloth appeared in the firing port. Undershirt or bandage tied to rifle cleaning rod. Universal signal. Cease fire, wounded, surrender. Moss kept his rifle aligned for another 30 seconds, watching for deception. Germans had used false surrenders before, white flag to draw fire and reveal positions, then resume attack. But no attack came. At 70 seconds after impact, 2 German soldiers emerged from concealed entrance 30 yards left of the firing port, hands raised, supporting a 3rd soldier between them. The wounded gunner. Head hanging, left arm limp, supported by his comrades who were abandoning position rather than continue fighting. Moss let them go. Killing wounded men trying to retreat violated his personal code, even if it didn't technically violate Geneva Convention articles regarding combat engagement. The machine gun nest was silent. The road was open. Moss extracted himself from behind the rifle, moved quickly to secondary position 40 yards east. Standard counter-sniper protocol, relocate after firing to avoid return fire on muzzle flash position. But no return fire came. The German crew was done fighting. At 0548 hours, Lieutenant Schaefer arrived at Moss's secondary position, face showing carefully controlled surprise. I saw the white flag. Did you? Hit confirmed, sir. Shoulder plate gap. German crew abandoned position. 3 personnel visible in retreat, 1 wounded. Schaefer stared at him. You placed a shot through a 3-inch gap at 600 yards with a technique that violates every training protocol. Yes, sir. Using a burned barn beam as a rifle rest. Yes, sir. Schaefer was quiet for a long moment, looking toward the now silent machine gun nest, then back to Moss. Battalion is going to want to understand how this was accomplished. Yes, sir. And when ballistics officers arrive to analyze your methodology, you're going to explain, in detail, how leaning a rifle against charred wood at odd angle produces superior accuracy compared to standard positions. I'll do my best, sir. Your best just opened the road to Enna, Sergeant. Your best might have changed the entire advance timeline for this sector. Schaefer extended his hand. Outstanding work. Moss shook the offered hand, feeling the weight of what had just occurred settling into awareness. 1 shot. 1 German wounded. 1 position neutralized. 1 road opened. Sometimes the mathematics of war simplified to single perfect moment. By 1200 hours, the barn position had become a gathering point for officers who wanted to understand what had happened. Captain Berkowitz arrived first, battalion intelligence officer, former physics instructor at City College of New York, a man who approached warfare with scientific curiosity. He'd examined the German position through binoculars, measured the distance with range-finding equipment, calculated angles and wind conditions, then returned to study Moss's shooting position. "Show me exactly how you positioned the rifle," Berkowitz had said. Moss had demonstrated, rifle stock wedged against beam, barrel supported along diagonal, his body aligned with the cant. Berkowitz had studied the setup from multiple angles, produced a notebook, began sketching diagrams. The beam angle is approximately 12 degrees from vertical. That creates a compound support structure where gravitational force actually enhances stability rather than compromising it. He'd paused, measuring the wood grain direction with a pocket compass. And the grain runs at roughly 30-degree angle to the beam axis, creating a natural dampening pattern that would absorb vibration differently than cross-grain would. "I didn't measure the grain angle, sir," Moss admitted. "I just felt that it worked. Empirical observation preceding theoretical understanding. That's how most significant discoveries occur." Berkowitz had pulled out a small metallurgical testing hammer, tapped the beam gently, listened to the resonance. Oak. Dense grain. Fire damage actually enhanced the dampening properties by introducing microfractures in the surface layer that dissipate vibration energy. He'd looked at Moss with expression mixing respect and fascination. "You intuited advanced harmonic dampening theory without understanding the physics. Remarkable. I just know it, sir. Grew up working with it." That practical knowledge succeeded where formal training failed. Berkowitz had made more notes. "I'm going to recommend immediate ballistics analysis. If your technique can be systematized and taught, it could revolutionize long-range marksmanship doctrine for irregular terrain." Major Hendricks had arrived at 1,315 hours, 3rd Battalion commander, veteran of World War I, a pragmatist who measured tactics by results rather than orthodoxy. He'd studied the German position, verified the distance and angle, examined the firing port that now showed impact crater 6 inches right of center. Evidence that Moss's shot had indeed struck within the target zone. "Single-shot neutralization at 600 yards uphill," Hendricks had said. 3 qualified snipers failed this same shot. "What did you do differently, Sergeant?" Moss had explained the beam lean technique, the harmonic dampening theory, the instinctive understanding that conventional positions introduced tremor that wood grain could absorb. Hendricks had listened without interruption, then asked the critical question, "Can this be taught? Or was this a unique circumstance that worked once through luck?" "Can be taught, sir. The principles are consistent. Find solid wood with tight grain, position at angle that provides natural cant for trajectory compensation, use the wood's dampening properties instead of fighting against human physiological tremor. Different situations would require different beam angles and wood types, but the fundamental methodology is reproducible." "You're certain?" "I'd stake my life on it, sir." "Already did." Hendricks had nodded slowly. "I'm authorizing formation of an experimental marksmanship assessment team. You'll demonstrate this technique to trained snipers and ballistic specialists. If they can replicate your results, we'll incorporate it into scout sniper training. If they can't," he'd paused meaningfully, "then we'll acknowledge you made a remarkable shot through skill and luck and we'll move on." "Understood, sir." The assessment team had arrived on July 20th, 2 days after Moss's shot. 6 personnel, 3 scout snipers from Division Reconnaissance, 2 ordnance specialists from Aberdeen Proving Ground, and 1 civilian ballistics consultant named Dr. Emil Hartmann who designed rifle scopes for Bosch and Lohm before the war. They'd spent 4 days conducting systematic testing. First, replication of Moss's original shot conditions. Using the same barn beam, same 12-degree cant, same Springfield M1903A4 rifle. The 3 scout snipers each fired 5-round groups at 600 yards uphill toward targets positioned at similar angle to the original German nest. Results: average group size of 7.2 inches, compared to 18.4-inch average for conventional prone position at identical range and angle. The improvement was dramatic and undeniable. Second, variation testing. Different beam angles, 8 degrees, 12 degrees, 15 degrees, 20 degrees, to determine optimal cant for various uphill trajectories. Results showed that 12-degree camp provided optimal balance for angles between 15 and 25 degrees elevation at ranges from 400 to 700 yards. Steeper or shallower beams required adjustment but still outperformed conventional positions. Third, wood type analysis. Oak, pine, maple, chestnut, different woods with different grain densities and dampening characteristics. Dr. Hartmann had conducted vibration frequency analysis using accelerometers attached to rifle stocks while shooters fired. His findings, delivered in technical report dated July 26, 1943. The beam lean technique exploits two distinct physical principles. 1. Gravitational dampening through compound angular support that converts vertical force into horizontal stability, and 2. Harmonic absorption through wood grain microstructure that dissipates vibration energy across crystalline cellular patterns. Dense hardwoods with tight grain, particularly oak and maple, demonstrate superior dampening coefficients compared to softer woods. Fire-damaged wood exhibits enhanced dampening due to surface microfracturing that creates additional energy dissipation pathways. Comparative testing demonstrates 40% reduction in barrel oscillation during recoil event when beam lean technique is employed versus conventional prone position at angles exceeding 15 degrees elevation. This reduction directly correlates to decreased point of impact dispersion at extended ranges. Recommendation: immediate incorporation of beam lean methodology into scout sniper training for irregular terrain operations. Technique is particularly applicable to mountain warfare, urban environments with structural debris, and any scenario where natural angular support structures are available. The report had been forwarded to Army Ground Forces Headquarters, then distributed to training commands. By August 15, 1943, the beam lean technique was being taught at Scout Sniper School at Camp Perry, Ohio. Instructors built wooden frames at various angles, taught students to evaluate wood grain and select optimal support structures, drilled the methodology until it became instinctive. By September 1943, Scout snipers employing the technique in Italy reported measurably improved success rates for long-range uphill engagements. Situations that had previously been considered nearly impossible were now tactically viable. The innovation spread through field experience. Snipers teaching other snipers, sharing practical knowledge that formal doctrine had missed. By early 1944, beam lean methodology appeared in field manuals as approved alternative technique for irregular terrain long-range engagement. Official recognition of Sergeant Raymond Moss's contribution came slowly. The Silver Star Citation, dated October 3, 1943, for gallantry in action against an armed enemy. Sergeant Raymond Moss, while operating in a combat zone, demonstrated exceptional marksmanship skill and tactical innovation in neutralizing an enemy machine gun position that had prevented Allied advance for 72 hours. Through employment of unconventional methodology, Sergeant Moss achieved single-shot elimination of enemy combatant at extended range under adverse conditions, thereby opening critical advance route and preventing estimated casualties in excess of 40 personnel. His actions reflect great credit upon himself, the United States Army, and the military service. No mention of the burned barn beam. No mention of the 12-degree cant. No mention that 3 trained snipers had failed the same shot. Military citations focused on results, not methods. But the men who'd been there understood. The soldiers of Company B, 1st Battalion, 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment knew that Moss had done what everyone said couldn't be done, using a technique that violated every rule, and had opened the road that let them advance instead of die. On the night of October 3rd, after the medal ceremony, Corporal Hayes, the Camp Perry competitor who'd been first to attempt the German nest shot, had approached Moss with bottle of liberated Italian wine. "I was taught that proper form matters more than results," Hayes had said. That following protocol was what separated professionals from amateurs. "You proved that wrong." "Didn't prove anything wrong," Moss had replied. "Just showed there's more than one way to solve a problem. You made that shot look easy. It wasn't easy. No, it was necessary. Different thing." Hayes had poured wine into 2 canteen cups. To necessity then. And to sergeants who figure out what works instead of what should work. They'd drunk to that. 2 soldiers who understood that war rewarded results, not orthodoxy. The Sicily campaign continued through August. Moss remained with Company B, participating in operations across the island, Palermo, Messina, the final push that drove German forces across the strait into mainland Italy. He fired his rifle many times in those weeks. Never again did he use the beam lean technique. The situations never aligned. But the knowledge remained, carried forward, shared with others. Company B jumped into Normandy on D-Day, June 6, 1944. Moss went over with them, parachute insertion behind Utah Beach, mission to secure causeways and prevent German reinforcement. He survived the jump, survived the first 36 hours of chaos and close combat that defined the Normandy airborne operations. He did not survive June 8. German counterattack at 0420 hours. Machine gun fire across exposed position. Moss was moving to better cover when rounds found him. 3 hit center mass, fatal within seconds. He was 29 years old. Staff Sergeant William Patterson, who'd been with Moss since Sicily, wrote to Moss's family. Raymond was the best natural shooter I ever knew. He understood rifles the way some men understand horses or engines, could read them, work with them, make them do things that shouldn't be possible. He saved a lot of lives in Sicily with a technique he figured out through pure instinct. The army taught it to snipers after that. Your son changed how we fight. He should be remembered for that. The beam-lean technique survived its creator. It became standard methodology, taught at marksmanship schools, practiced by scout snipers throughout the European and Pacific theaters. The technique was used in the Apennine Mountains in Italy, in the Vosges Mountains in France, in the Philippine Highlands. After-action reports documented its effectiveness. November 1943, Monte Cassino. Scout sniper neutralizes German observation post at 680 yards uphill using beam-lean technique. Estimated casualties prevented, 23. February 1944, Anzio. 3 separate scout sniper teams employ beam-lean methodology during counterattack operations. Combined confirmed kills, 11. Estimated casualties prevented, 67. October 1944, Vosges Mountains. Battalion Sniper Section uses beam-lean technique exclusively during week-long mountain operation. Success rate for long-range uphill engagements, 73%, compared to historical average of 31% for conventional positions. The numbers told story that words couldn't capture. Moss's intuitive understanding of wood grain harmonics and angular support dynamics had created tactical advantage that saved lives measurably. Post-war analysis by Army Infantry School at Fort Benning produced technical monograph in 1947, Alternative Shooting Positions for Irregular Terrain, Analysis of World War II Field Innovations. An entire chapter focused on the beam-lean technique, though Sergeant Moss was identified only as Kentucky-born NCO with intuitive understanding of materials science and ballistics. The technique appeared in Korean War field manuals, adapted for Asian terrain. Appeared in Vietnam-era training materials, refined for jungle operations. Elements of the methodology, using environmental structures as harmonic dampeners, exploiting angular support for stability, influenced modern marksmanship theory about stabilization systems and recoil management. Raymond Moss's body was initially buried in Normandy American Cemetery. In 1948, his remains were returned to Kentucky at his family's request, interred in a small cemetery outside Harlan County, headstone reading simply, E.D. Raymond Moss, U.S. Army, 1914 to 1944. No mention of Sicily. No mention of the shot. No mention that his innovation had become Doctrine. His Silver Star was displayed in Harlan County Courthouse for 3 years, then moved to storage when display space was needed for Korean War decorations. The medal's current location is unknown, likely lost or discarded during courthouse renovation in 1967. The barn where Moss made his shot was destroyed by German artillery in August 1943. No marker indicates what occurred there. The ridge where the German machine gun nest was positioned has been reclaimed by vegetation. Concrete emplacement still visible if you know where to look, firing port now filled with decades of weathering. But scout snipers still learn the beam-lean technique. Still practice finding angular support structures, evaluating wood grain, positioning rifles against natural dampening systems when artificial supports aren't available. They learn it as Doctrine now. Formal methodology with technical specifications and training protocols. Few know it began with a Kentucky sergeant who violated every rule and made an impossible shot because the road had to open and the mathematics required one German to die so that dozens of Americans could live. That calculation was simple enough. The execution required genius that formal training couldn't teach. Sometimes war rewards intuition more than doctrine. Sometimes the best solution comes from a man who understands materials and necessity more than he understands regulations. Raymond Moss understood both. He made the shot. The road opened. And the innovation outlived him by 80 years and counting.